And Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, I always appreciate when someone is an advocate for street tree maintenance. And I would just say I've been on the commission, is it Nyana? I don't want to mispronounce that, for 6 years. And this has been one of our priority topics. We by no means want it to just be PSEF, and I don't want to speak for everyone. We think that PSEF is the first identified funding opportunity to do this, but we have been working actively to find a long-term solution. So I think you have a group of supporters here. I would really say that Parks has an effort known as Sustainable Futures, where they've been looking for long-term funding, identified funding to do this. So I would just say, like, kind of also going maybe to the parks, although you have some parks staff here beyond urban forestry, but also to city council, right? Like, I think this is a long-term commitment that we believe in. We're excited for an opportunity, but we also readily agree that a 5-year allocation, if approved, is not enough. So I just want to say, keep it up, and please, I would continue to raise your voice even beyond our levels.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, thank you. I just, since the recording wasn't on during that statement from Ms. Brigg, will you send that to us, email us to us, and then we can sort of have it be part of the record for the meeting?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on this? Okay, I would also like to express, words of support. It's really important for us to have neighborhood associations speak up. And you just want to second what Commissioner Vandermark said, that this is a high priority. And we'd like to find an ongoing funding source, and we'll continue to do as much as we can do to support that.
Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, we're going to move on to approving meeting minutes. Any changes requested? Commissioner Nelson.
I didn't listen to the recording of the meeting, but was it stated in the meeting that the Urban Forestry Summit would be at regular school, or was that just information I happened to have from another source? If it was stated, I would like to have it in the minutes for the record, but if it wasn't said, then that's fine.
Great. Yeah, and the times. I think I saw it from another source also, the specifics on that. Great. Any other changes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, a second for approving the minutes. Okay, I think I saw a second. Thank you. And all in favor? Okay, any opposed? Any, Casey, Commissioner Clapp, are you opposed, or is that kind of a hand off to the side? Okay. Any abstentions? Okay, one abstention looks like. Okay, thanks. Okay, 2 abstentions, I guess. Commissioner Meisner, that was abstention. Okay.
Yeah, that was an abstention.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks. Thank you. We're going to move on to the city forester report.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So, Jen is not with us today. She's out on leave. So, Angie is acting city forester with Jen out, but I'll be giving the forester's report. So, I'm gonna dive into that. So, I have a lot. It's a little lengthy, so I'm gonna try to stop after each sort of category of updates, and then pause for questions. Megan, are you raising your hand, or is that an accident?
Yeah.
No worries. All right. Okay, I'm gonna dive right in. So I'm gonna talk about storm response first. Give an update on Urban Forestry's response to this extreme weather event that we had almost a month ago now. But before I get into that, I'd like to say a few words about our staff. You know, the part of of storm response that I think most people see is our arborists out responding to trees, blocking roads, hazardous trees in parks. But there's sort of a less visible part of our work that happens after that. So after our arborists go out and they mitigate the immediate hazard, what we're often left with are hundreds, especially in this case, of damaged trees, which they need to be fully and safely removed before they become hazardous again. And we want to plant trees to replace those that we've lost. And all of that work, you know, it starts with our arborists, but then it shifts to our permitting and regulation team. And this team includes tree inspectors in the field, tree tech staffing our single point of contact lines, and the supervisors and professional staff that support them. It's really difficult and it's highly skilled work, and it really keeps the operation going. They provide guidance to the public. They responded to almost 900 voicemails received since the storm started. They ensure that when we lose those trees, new ones get planted. If there's dangerous trees, they get removed before they cause people or property. And when trees are infected with harmful pests or pathogens like Dutch elm disease, they make sure they get removed before that pest spreads to their neighbor's elm tree next door. It's very time sensitive and important work. And all this is really essential to having a healthy forest and a healthy city. And so when we have storm events like this, those staff might be the first person that someone from the public interacts with after they've been through a traumatic event. That can be a storm, that can be a tree falling in their yard. Maybe it hits their home, maybe it comes close, and that's a scary event. And so oftentimes when people are experiencing trauma like that, and then they have to interact with someone in response to it, that trauma gets sort of transferred. It can get transferred through the phone, through an email, or to the tree inspector that's at their house assessing the tree in their yard. Often that's unintentional. It's people responding out of stress that they're experiencing. But sometimes there's a lot of anger and it gets directed maybe at the wrong person. I just want to note that our staff have been on the receiving end of a lot of that in the last few weeks. This was a difficult experience for everyone involved. And so I just want to note that just as we at Urban Forestry have been working hard to have a trauma-informed response to what has happened in the last few weeks to members of the public, we are also trying to be trauma-informed with how we support our staff as well. And so I would just ask, if you have a moment and you value the work that goes into keeping our forest healthy and serving the people of Portland, maybe send an encouraging word of appreciation to them. The work that they do is just as important to having a healthy forest as things like tree planting events that get a little bit more attention and feel good. So and maybe if you do, you know, copy a member of city council as well. Often they only hear when things don't go exactly right. So I just want to start with that. Okay, and so getting into my updates. So as I mentioned, one of the ways that we've responded to the storm is we are unfortunately waived fees for retroactive tree removal applications. So when a tree fails, when we still require a permit to ensure that yes, Adrian, the best way, you can send it to trees@portlandoregon.gov. That's our main intake, and that's a great way to get a message to our staff. So yeah, we have been waiving that $100 tree removal fee. That application fee is tied to permit requirements to make sure that when trees are removed, a new tree is planted in its place. in response to the storm, we have waived that fee, and we've begun issuing refunds for fees that were already paid. And that was effective on January 30th, and that'll run through February 23rd. We've already issued 91 refunds for about $10,000 worth of fees. We have also, in response, expanded walk-in support to help people in person with their permits. This is at the Parks Customer Service Center, which is at the Portland building, and then at the 1900 building as well. And I'll throw some links in the chat for some of that. So if you want to read further into that. We have also implemented temporary procedures to directly issue permits when possible, if we already have all the information we have. So if our crews went out to a street tree that failed, we are aware that that street tree failed. We are implementing procedures so that the property owners don't need to submit a permit to us. We already know it, and we can issue the permit without them having to start that on their own. I'm not sure how many of those we have, but we've started implementing those on February 7th. Oh, and 36 have been issued so far. So just some of the ways we're trying to respond, knowing that this has been quite an experience for everyone, and anything that we can do to change the way that we do work to be responsive to that. I mentioned things like follow-up, where our staff have to follow up after a tree has failed. We have about 265 of those, which have been referred to our code compliance team. And then, as I mentioned, we've responded to 875 voicemails that have been received since January 13th, which is about three times as many as we typically have. So just to give you a sense of the volume and how, even as the weather has cleared up and it is nicer and lots of roads are open, there's still a lot of work going on. That was everything on storm response. So if anyone has any questions on that.
Yeah, I know this was a big deal for really all of the communities. Probably everyone knows someone affected if they were not affected themselves. So yeah, I would love to sort of go around and hear from the commissioners on any thoughts they might have. I think Commissioner Meissner was first, and then Commissioner Nelson.
Cool.
And I
Thank
could
you.
also go around the board. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you to Urban Forestry for waiving the fees and easing the permitting process. I know that got a lot of bad press about the fees after trees damaged homes and such. So I really appreciate that you guys waiving the fee for everyone.
Commissioner Nelson. Thank you, Commissioner Meissner.
So the waiving of the fees, can that be done? The request for removal, is that done online, just with pictures? Are you asking for verification that this is storm related versus a chainsaw that went astray? I mean, what kind of verification are you asking? I know it's stressful, but I also know this is an opportunity for people to get rid of trees they haven't been able to get rid of.
Yeah, our permitting regulation manager, Casey Jogers, is here, and I think she might be able to speak to some of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Hi, everybody. Think you all know me, but Casey Jogers, the Urban Forestry Permitting and Regulation Manager. So to speak to that question, we have added some additional leniency in terms of what the documentation requirements are for retroactives. And I did put the link for the press release that went out about that, and it goes into a little bit more detail. But as long as there's evidence on the ground that's still there, or if there's an insurance claim, we're being quite lenient in regards to what our standard procedures are. Just understanding that in the wake of a pretty traumatic event, people may not have had the moment to think about taking a photograph or something that would be done under our normal procedures. So again, there's more detail in that link, and happy to answer other questions if you have any about it. Thanks.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, first, I just want to appreciate, Brian, you opening with that. In my job, I know a lot of people sought critiques of the city, which I was very avoidant of because everybody is working so hard. So I just want to really echo the stress. But I also wanted to ask, just for understanding and not assumptiveness. Was there, in terms of the spread of impact, were there certain parts of Portland that were more impacted? I was just curious. I've heard a lot of anecdotal, but I was curious if there's actually more factual information, like we see a higher level in these parts of Portland.
Yeah, I don't have data on that. I know from just what I've observed. I live in North Portland. North Portland seemed to be largely spared. I think it was much more on the west side. And then I think more sort of deeper southeast. I don't know, Casey, if you know that some of the permit data coming in.
We're still working on that because we're still in the midst of responding. So, perhaps by next meeting, we could have more detailed info. But generally what Brian said is that we're seeing that most of it's in sort of the deeper southeast type area, at least where the more severe situations were occurring, where throughout the rest of the city, it was just kind of, trickled in here and there, but not quite as traumatic as what was happening in southeast.
Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, echoing the appreciation, and in addition to the fee issue, I was struck by the times that people accused the city of denying their permit to remove a tree previously. And I don't think we need to take the time to go into it now, but in terms of private trees, I think it would be helpful for the Forestry Commission to have a better sense of under what circumstances, how those tree reviews take place, and under what circumstances the city might actually deny a permit versus requiring perhaps a high mitigation fee that a person decides they don't want to pay. So I'm just, I'm curious about those differences, but I don't think we have the time to go into it now. So I just want to flag it maybe for a future agenda, or maybe Casey Jogers could send us, a little explanation about that in an email. That'd be fine as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I can provide a little bit, but I'll just say really quick that remember that we have regulations in the city, and that those regulations are sort of how we approach those requests. And so a tree needs to be deemed dead, dying, or dangerous to have sort of an automatic removal applied to it. So in speaking to sort of like, do we require a higher mitigation? That isn't really a negotiation. It's really about the tree condition. So if the tree condition warrants removal, it is granted removal. If it does not warrant removal at the time of inspection, then it doesn't. But I can provide more information if you'd like. There are times where maybe there's an additional, we may go through a level 1 as our standard, and we might go into different levels of inspection depending upon what we're looking at. Each case is specific, but sort of the guidance is through Title 11 in terms of, are you dead, dying, or dangerous? You can be removed. Beyond that, it's a little bit more of a deeper investigation depending upon what's there. But we don't allow healthy trees to be removed and just require a higher mitigation. If that's sort of what you were getting at, I'm not sure.
Well, the type B permit that for trees that are not dead, dying, or dangerous, that's where I think we need to know a little bit more about the review criteria and how you actually implement that, and under what circumstances you would approve that kind of a situation or not. So, but for later, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any other commissioners have thoughts? And yeah, just to remind us, we have a large amount of other material and we need to cover in the Forester's report. So maybe just flag, some initial thoughts, and we'll make sure to have a sort of a strategic debrief at a later meeting where we really get a lot more info. But yeah, it's important now to just kind of give, what were some of the high level things that came to your mind about this? Okay, Commissioner Plack.
Yeah, just echoing what everyone said. I appreciated Megan's question about where was it concentrated, like what can we learn? And I know that's what right now is you're still triaging and trying to to like deal with all of the damage, and that'll come as time goes on, there's more availability. Just piggybacking on what Commissioner Jortner said, I also one thing I saw that was reported on was someone who was denied a permit to remove a leaning tree. And I think what's tricky is like the press and the public may not always know that leaning doesn't always mean a tree's like imminently going to fall down or it's unhealthy. And so some of these things, I think it's hard because like the public aren't trained arborists, right? And neither are some of the journalists reporting on this. So I just wanted to bring that for, like, I'm not an expert either, but that's something I know to be true, that that's not like a sign of a tree that's about to fall down. So but it might seem that way to the homeowner, perhaps.
Anyone else? I'm just going to run around. Commissioner McMillan, any thoughts? Commissioner Nelson. Okay.
All
Let's see
right.
who else? Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and go on. I'm just going to throw in real quickly that yeah, I'd love to hear at a future agenda item any, kind of using the retrospectoscope and knowing that these storms are probably going to stay either increased in severity or worsened. What are some of the larger policy issues that we need to think about? There's probably a whole slew of them. One of the things that came to mind for me was is there a different track for safety concerns in trees in terms of the review, the speed of going out, and that kind of thing? And then the sort of communication to the public about that so that everyone's really clear, that safety is prioritized and this is what safety is, this is what it isn't, those sorts of things. So, yeah, anyway. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll keep going with my report.
Keep going, yeah.
And those are all good thoughts, actually. I'm gonna have an update on the urban forest plan, and the UFC will have some increasing role in the next few months. So those are all good thoughts to be keeping in mind when we get into that work. But first, I want to give an update on the Equitable Tree Canopy Program. So program development is continuing. We've completed our first phase of initial hires. I think that's around 6 or 7 staff are hired and working on that program. We also have 3 supervisor positions that are posted right now. So those are on the City of Portland's job board if you would like to spread that opportunity around, because they got some really great job openings. Have another update on Equitable Tree Canopy. So we are working with Parks' Community Partnership Program to offer outreach contracts to promote yard tree giveaway in the upcoming fall season 2020-24. It's an early implementation measure of the Equitable Tree Canopy Program focused on community organizations that can help us reach the underserved communities that are in our priority planting areas. So those community partnership contracts, which are up to about $10,000, will support giving away 1,000 free trees through our yard tree giveaway program. Those will be the first 1,000 trees planted through PCEF's Equitable Tree Canopy Program, and that'll increase our planting from 3,500 trees to 4,500 trees in 2024-25 planting season, with the ultimate goal of getting to 10,000 trees planted annually through that program. So just the first step, but it's getting money out the door to some of these community organizations that are so important to this work. So excited to have that moving forward. I also have a few updates on some recent community partnership events that Urban Forestry has held. So on February 10th, we had a Lunar New Year tree planting at Gates Park, which is in East Portland near Pal Butte. We partnered with the Oregon Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs. State Representative Hal Wynn attended that event, and we had 60 community volunteers out there to plant trees. So really great Lunar New Year celebration there. And then some upcoming events. So on March 9th, we'll have a career fair and tree planting event at John Luby Park. It's an opportunity for community members to join in tree planting, but also learn about some of the open job positions we have, both in urban forestry and parks in general. And I'll put a link into all this into the chat so everyone can take a look. And then on March 23rd, we have our rescheduled Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service event at Lentz Park. This was derailed by the storm event. And so this is a partnership with Green Lentz, which is a wonderful community organization working in the Lentz area. Director Long, Commissioner Ryan, and State Representative Confam will be in attendance. So really great event. We were very saddened that the weather didn't allow it to happen as planned, but it's been rescheduled to March 23rd. So check that out if you're able. And then finally, the Tree Summit is on March 2nd at Regular Elementary School. We'll be sharing information on our street tree inventory, connecting canopies. We'll be talking about their work, and then staff from PSEF will be there as well. So I will throw a link to all of those events, and you can sign up through the link that I'm dropping in the chat there. After that, I have 2 more updates after that. Any questions on anything that I just provided an update on there? I see Bruce's hand up, yeah.
This is a technical question. When you put things in the link, what am I supposed to do? Make a copy of that quickly and put it somewhere else, or wait until a tape of the meeting is available and then go to it? I don't use Outlook calendars. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when there's a link. I'm in the chat. How's that work?
It's just there for if you want to click on it, click on the link now to access that information.
But I'm in a meeting and I'm trying to listen. So, I mean, I can look at it later, but I don't see how it helps me when I'm in a meeting. But
You can open it and email it to yourself. That's one
that's
thing.
That's quick. Okay. All right.
All right. If no other questions, we only have 5 more minutes for this part, so I'll keep moving on. Quick update on the Portland Urban Forest Plan. So we are prepping for our second Technical Advisory Committee meeting on February 29th. We'll be discussing key takeaways from 11 interviews that we have held with the project team, with city staff in every bureau that touches trees. So we've met with over 80 staff to talk about what's going well in terms of urban forest management of the city, what are some opportunities that we have. So we'll be debriefing that with our technical advisory committee. And we'll also discuss an approach for reviewing peer city and industry best practices for setting canopy targets, because that'll be one of the key deliverables of the project. In March, we will also have our second community advisory committee meeting. This will be focused on understanding tree equity, identifying barriers to preserving and planting and caring for trees, and then really setting up the conversations on discussing what are the visions and goals for the urban forest. And then lastly, the project team is also prepping for workshops with some of our community priorities, with some of our priority communities, which will be hosted through March. The team is also drafting a survey and creating activities for an upcoming open house event. The survey will launch in mid-March, and we're aiming for an open house event to be the week of April 22nd. So a lot of information going to be coming out really soon with all of that. And there will be a project email sent down, and you should all be on the list to receive that. So all the information will be there. And then both the April and June UFC meetings will have some, we're kind of expecting both of those meetings to be all urban forest plan. There's gonna be a lot of reporting on the community listening we've been doing, some of the reporting on the data analysis that's happening behind the scenes. So there's gonna be a lot of information to discuss, both to present and for the UFC to really start getting into the details on it. So I know we've only had updates at this point, but the real kind of work, especially of the UFC, is going to start soon. Right. And then my last item is related to the email that I sent out yesterday. So this is related to the Natural Resource Service Delivery Project, which you've had a lot of updates on, and we had the joint meeting with the Parks Board and the Port and Utility Board about a month ago now. So City Council held a work session on the path forward for this work on February 5th. Commissioner Jortner provided invited testimony there. Since the UFC did not have a chance to convene and vote, Commissioner Jortner provided personal testimony, not on behalf of the UFC. And one of the next steps on that project is the bureaus involved in that work will be convening a workshop to provide more opportunity for involvement by the Urban Forestry Commission, the Parks Board, and the Port and Utility Board. This was something that those 3 groups asked for, and they're taking some actions to make that happen. So we are looking for 2 representatives from the Urban Forestry Commission to take part in that upcoming workshop. And there will also be a planning meeting to prepare for that as well. So I know that Laura Lehman with Parks is here, who can talk. She's much more involved in this project than I am, and so she has a lot more information. But with our last minute or two before we get to the next agenda item, it'd be great if we could identify 2 members of the UFC who are willing to participate in that. And Laura, if there's anything that I missed or got wrong, feel free to jump in.
No, I think you got it. The only thing I would add is I think in terms of time commitment, we're thinking that it would be up to 3, probably 2 meetings, but potentially 3 between now and the end of April. And as Brian said, what our current thinking is that there would be a planning meeting that these folks would be involved with that would also include 2 representatives from the Portland Utility Board and from the Parks Board. Or we would do some planning for that workshop Brian mentioned, and then attending the workshop. There's potential for 1 more meeting beyond that. And then this would be providing the workshop purpose is to provide some additional feedback on the revised work plan. It's currently being revised based on the feedback that we've already received from your group and from other groups. And so we would be looking at that at the workshop. And then there is likely to be additional board involvement beyond that time. But what we're talking about right now is just through the end of April, and then any future involvement would be determined after that time.
Great. I see that Commissioner Lilly has said they would be willing to participate in the workshop. That's great. We do not have an idea of when the meeting. I don't think we know, Laura, when the meetings will be held. It sounds like those are still to be determined.
They haven't been scheduled yet because we're kind of waiting to know who's participating before scheduling. I think the current thinking is that they would be held during the daytime, but that's a conversation about scheduling that hasn't happened yet.
Maybe what we could do is follow up with an email and with the details written out, and see if we could recruit a second person.
Sure.
Sound good? Yeah, great. It sounds, very interesting, very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Jortner?
Yeah, thanks. I would like to, I don't want to take the time now, but I'd like to email the commission, or through Brian maybe, kind of a summary of what I said in my comments, because even though I was commenting as an individual, I was trying to touch on issues that we have addressed in the past, including, well, I won't get into it, but I want you to have it so you know what was said at the council meeting.
Great.
Is that okay, Brian?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay,
All right.
let's go ahead and move on. Or are we finished there?
Yeah, I think we're
Okay,
good.
awesome.
Thank you, Commissioner Lilly. And then, yeah, we will email to try and get that second person identified.
Great. Sorry that we don't have time for more questions. Maybe follow up with questions, by email.
Sure, that's great.
Great. Or it probably will fit into another agenda item too. So, okay. We're going to move on to the Title 33 Land Division Project with Morgan Tracy.
Morning.
Morning.
Great to be here. Thanks for having
Thanks for
me.
coming.
Yeah. It's nice to see a bunch of familiar faces, but I see a number of new faces too, so this is pretty exciting. I'm Morgan Tracy, a senior planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and project manager for the Land Division Code Update project. So kind of taking a little bit of a shift from our topic, the topics you were just covering this morning. I am going to share a little presentation. It's about 15 or 20 minutes long, just covering what this project is, get us a little oriented to what the heck a land division even is, and then talk about sort of next steps for this project. So let's see if this is working. Great. So in this presentation, we're going to tell you a little bit more about the Land Division Code Update project. We'll give you an introduction to land divisions and their regulations. provide an overview of the goals and proposals of the project, and end with the project timeline. So last November, City Council introduced multiple projects to reduce the cost of building new housing in Portland. One of these projects, the Land Division Code Update, specifically aims to remove barriers to residential land divisions. Through amendments to the city zoning code, the project will focus on streamlining the process and applying for a land division. But before we talk about that, we'll give a little bit of an introduction what land divisions are. So these are the process where one property can be split into multiple smaller lots. Each of these lots can then be owned and developed by different people. Land divisions are often used to create new lots that housing can be built on afterwards. Land divisions can vary in complexity. So for example, a land division can be used to split a property where there's an existing home, so a new house can be built on the new lot. Land divisions with only a few lots are often smaller in scope and thus less complex to review. Large vacant pieces of property can also be divided. So these types of projects might involve creating new roads, creating new utility connections, and building many new houses. We also have something called a middle housing land division. So recent changes in state law have created this new type of land division called middle housing land divisions. These allow certain types of housing units to be divided and placed onto separate lots through an expedited process. Unlike regular land divisions that divide properties into smaller lots for future development, i.e. shovel-ready lots, a middle housing land division is used to subdivide properties with already permitted and under construction or already existing multi-dwelling structures like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. The purpose of the middle housing land division is to enable the units in those housing types to be sold individually on their own lots. The Land Division Code Update is not proposing changes to the requirements for these types of land divisions, as they're already subject to the state requirements and a very streamlined set of regulations. So the design of a regular land division is reviewed to ensure it meets the requirements of the city's code. The requirements for land divisions span multiple topic areas, including lot dimensions and density, flood hazards, landslide hazards, utility requirements, and other subject areas. So this project is important for a few key reasons. Land divisions unlock potential for more housing in the single dwelling zones. In these zones, development is mostly limited to a number of dwellings per lot. By increasing the number of lots, land divisions increase the number of dwellings that can be built. The new standards that are proposed as part of this project will simplify the process for applying for a land division, especially for smaller, less complex sites. Through this project, more housing will be able to be constructed throughout the city. Almost all land divisions are in residential areas. 73% of applications in the last 20 years were in single dwelling zones, and 22% were in the multi-dwelling zones, with only 5% being located in commercial or industrial zones. In addition, most land divisions are smaller projects. In the last 20 years, 78% of land division applications were projects that included 2 or 3 lots, and 96% of all applications were for fewer than 11 lots. And as mentioned earlier, typically these smaller land divisions are less complex, but still provide great opportunities to create and fill development. As most land divisions are in residential zones proposing 2 or 3 lots, the project's focus is on streamlining the process for these smaller residential developments. There are several goals for the project, including creating a set of clear and objective standards for residential land divisions, updating the city's potential landslide hazard area map, and recalibrating the standards, thresholds, and review procedures for land divisions. So over the next few slides, we'll talk about each of these in further detail. The first proposal of the project is to create a set of clear and objective standards as an alternative to the existing discretionary approval criteria that are used for land divisions. What's the difference? Well, clear and objective standards and discretionary criteria are 2 ways of writing planning and zoning regulations. In the next 2 slides, we'll discuss the differences between these 2 methods and why offering clear and objective standards is a useful tool in streamlining the review of new housing. First, let's go over what discretionary criteria are. Currently, much of the regulations for land divisions are written as discretionary criteria. Criteria require the person reviewing the application to use their judgment to determine if the requirements for that project have been met. These criteria are written in a way so that it can be determined how the intent of that regulation should be met for each unique project. The flexibility of these regulations means that it's not always clear what will be required of a project. It can often require lengthy analysis to make a clear argument that the regulation has been met. This lack of clarity can create barriers for the development of new housing and increase the amount of time it takes to review an application. Clear and objective standards are a different way to write land use regulations that are more well-defined than discretionary criteria. These standards do not require any judgment to determine whether they have been met. Clear and objective standards are well-defined requirements that often rely on measurable quantities. These might include distances, measurements of area, or percentages of a feature on a site. Although clear and objective standards offer clarity for what will be required, they can often lack the flexibility to work around specific characteristics of a site. There may be some circumstances where an application could not meet a clear and objective standard, but could meet the intent of the regulation through discretionary criteria. It's also important to note that recent state law now requires residential development be provided with a clear and objective standards option. So let's take a look at a sort of simple example that can help demonstrate the difference between these two. For this example, let's look at a hypothetical regulation for the location of a building. A discretionary criteria regulating the location of new buildings might say, buildings must be situated to promote privacy and reduce visual impact to the extent practicable. All those things that are underlined are discretionary language. A clear and objective standard regulating the location of a building might state, buildings must be set back 10 feet from the property line. So the discretionary criteria offer the flexibility to where the building can be located, while the clear and objective standards give clarity where exactly it should be located. The proposed changes will allow land division applicants to choose whether to use clear and objective standards or discretionary criteria while completing their application. Applicants will be able to choose between standards and criteria for each of the types of regulation that apply to the land division. For example, a project applicant could choose to show that their application meets the discretionary criteria for tree preservation, but use clear and objective standards for floodplain requirements. The choice between these two will be available for all of the requirements that apply to a residential land division. This will allow applicants to choose between clarity or flexibility while still ensuring the land division meets the city's planning goals. In any case, whether standards, criteria, or a bit of each are used, the application will still be handled as a land use review with notification, opportunity for input, and conditions of approval applied. So let's take this a step further and look at an example that might be of particular interest to this commission. And it's also an example of where the proposal has evolved through the discussion draft to our current proposal. So for the current tree preservation requirements for a land division, currently both quantitative standards apply as well as the criteria. So for example, the clear and objective standard will say preserve all the 20-inch and larger trees and 20% of the total tree diameter on the site, or the criteria will say preserve the most and best trees possible. And those two things currently work together. The proposal is to separate these two. So we have clear and objective standards as an option, or meeting the approval criteria when the standards cannot be met. Without the criteria in place to support preservation of the highest quality trees, we are proposing to increase the total tree diameter threshold in the standards to capture a greater quantity of trees in the effort to preserve more and thus better trees overall. We're also proposing to remove option 6, which is this tree canopy area option, due to its lack of use over time and generally difficulty in applying the standard. And we can have a further discussion when I get to the end. I'm almost there. The second proposal of the project is to update the city's potential landslide hazard area map. The proposed changes will replace the current map, which was created in 1997, with an updated version using a more accurate landslide hazard mapping data. The landslide hazard map highlights areas throughout the city where the greatest risk of a landslide occurring. This map is prepared using factors such as hillside slope, geology, and locations of previous landslides. Land divisions in these potential landslide hazard areas are required to submit a geotechnical report. Currently, this requirement is based on the 1997 map data, and since then, the data and tools used to determine landslide hazards have become more accurate. The proposed map uses this more precise data to better identify landslide risk areas. This will ensure that the requirement for geotechnical reports is only applied in areas that have an elevated level of risk. And finally, the third proposal is to recalibrate the standards, thresholds, and review procedures for land divisions. And these changes will adjust when certain requirements apply and simplify or eliminate unnecessary procedures. These changes will help facilitate new housing and infill development, particularly for those smaller, less complex land divisions. As a result of this proposal, some of the land division requirements will only apply when the project passes a specific threshold, such as the number of lots being proposed or the size of property being subdivided. These new thresholds will help clarify when regulations do not apply to smaller projects, which will help streamline their review. Other regulations are proposed to be removed from the land division requirements. The regulations that are being removed have been found to be ineffective or unnecessary to meet the city's planning goals, while increasing how long it takes to review a project. For example, currently, for any land division where environmental review is required, the procedure type automatically escalates to a type 3 review. These are typically assigned by numbers of proposed lots or when there's proposed development in areas like landslide hazards or floodplains. However, for environmental review, a type 3 procedure is assigned even for a 2 or 3 lot partition. A type 3 review requires a public hearing before the hearings officer and higher fees, and it also necessitates a pre-application conference prior to submitting the application. The total added fees for a 2 or 3 lot partition as a result is approximately $17,000. This change will put land divisions with environmental resource review on par with land divisions that have other unique site attributes like landslide hazards. So those 2 or 3 lot partitions will be a type 2X review and type 3 review for the larger land divisions for 4 or more lots. And finally, the timeline. So we've just completed the discussion draft comment period. We've incorporated those comments into our proposed draft. That will be publishing on Tuesday, the 20th. The Planning Commission has a hearing scheduled for March 26th at 5 p.m. And they will follow that up with a work session, provide a recommendation to City Council. We'll be at City Council sometime in the summer. And by October 1st, we should have these new rules in effect. And oh, this is for Bruce. Sorry, Bruce. If you didn't know what to do with the links in the chat, the QR code, if you've got a phone, you're supposed to scan that. But I'm going to drop the link in the chat. And maybe that'll make it a little easier. And with that, I'm going to end the screen share and see if there are questions after that fire hose of information.
Excuse me. Commissioner Nelson.
With land divisions, if a property is under a certain square footage, the tree code doesn't apply to it, I believe. I don't know if that's still true. Maybe Casey or Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a way where for a land division would happen and one property got under the size and then trees could be cut easily. Is that still the case?
No, and that shouldn't be the case today. So if you are, so there's a difference between the way Title 11 applies and the way Title 33 applies to development. So Title 11 applies to individual development projects on a pre-existing lot. And that looks at the lot size. So if the lot size is less than 5,000 square feet, it's exempt from the Title 11 tree preservation requirements. For a land division, if there are any trees over 6 inches in diameter on the land division site, they are subject to these tree preservation requirements as part of that land use review. So the exemptions really for a land division, a regular land division, are trees that are less than 6 inches, trees that are dead, dying, dangerous, or nuisance trees, and that's it. So the lot size is not a factor in a land division case. I will make another distinction, which is the middle housing land divisions operate more like the Title 11 cases. So if you're building a fourplex on a 4,000 square foot lot, it's going to be subject to those Title 11 requirements and not subject to the tree preservation requirements in that case.
Yeah, and I guess just an important thing to add, just to get to Bruce, what you were referring to. So if there's a land division process, they might create 2 smaller lots that under Title 11 would be exempt, but if the trees are required to be preserved through this land division process, that requirement carries through to the full development. So this is a way through the land division, we can ensure preservation even though they would be building on smaller lots. So just something to note there.
That's right. Thanks. Thanks for that.
Commissioner McMillan, and then Commissioner Vandemark, and then Commissioner Clapp.
Just really quickly, a question about the middle housing divisions. Is part of that process ensuring like an access easement for each one of those?
Yeah, so
Or formalizing it as part of
Yeah.
the process procedure?
Yeah. So the just to reiterate, the middle housing land divisions are sort of outside of this particular project scope, but the existing process for middle housing land divisions, there are very few requirements that apply there. They're basically looking at the building permit and dropping property lines through a structure. But one of the requirements that they look at is provision of separate utilities and access and utility easements, as well as a whole host of other easements that are necessary for the construction of the building. But yeah, easements is one of the very few requirements that are looked at.
Thanks.
Okay, I think it was Commissioner Vandemark.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts and then maybe some clarifications because I want to make certain I understand the tree preservation aspect of this because I realized there was that slide, there was a lot of numbers, and I might be confused. So I'll start with one, it seems like a lot of this is happening in single residential zones, right? And so I always just want to know what the goal is, right? Because there's a lot of like, it's being streamlined to get more housing, but I'm like, streamlined for who, right? Like that is always a question for me. And my guess is developers. And so like, is the ultimate goal more housing in general or more specific housing? Because when I look at occupancy rates, right? The issue is, I know that we've had an precedent addition of affordable housing, but like, there's still the rental versus purchase. So are we just building more houses or are we trying to streamline the process so we have more affordable houses? So I'd kind of like to know more about that. And then if you can speak just about the tree preservation, because there's both preserving existing trees, but then there's also preserving space for trees. And as someone that lives in a neighborhood that is a single family residential neighborhood that is more low income, I see a lot of lots where one house is taken down and then a bunch of houses are put up, which I want housing, but then there's literally almost no space for trees. So I think about as that is happening throughout the part of North Portland I live in, it seems like we have a lot more people, but a lot less space for them to have trees. So I'm just trying to understand the ultimate goals around housing affordability and higher density and tree preservation.
And the simple answer is yes, all of that. All of that. More housing, more affordable housing, and more diversity of housing types, tenures, etc. But the land division project is only sort of approaching one angle of that. So we've got a number of different projects. I mentioned the city council directive to us to, excuse me. Sorry about that. The directive to us to expand opportunities for more housing and promote residential development. Land divisions are about creating opportunities for housing to be built. It's not about a particular type of housing or affordability target. It's so in a single dwelling zone, you basically hit a cap of 4 units, no matter how big the lot is. A 1 acre lot, the most you can put on it is a 4-plex. So through the land division, that lot can be split up and create more lots that can each have 1 to 4 units on it. So it's about, for this project, it's about supply essentially, and taking advantage of the existing capacity that's been planned for an area. We have another project called the Housing Needs Analysis and the Housing Production Strategy that are also coming forward to Planning Commission in the next few months and City Council ultimately. It's a state requirement that we produce a report that sort of takes stock of where our existing housing is and what our housing need for the next 20 years will be. And the Housing Production Strategy is looking at that sort of what are the full suite of tools to achieve those targets. So I don't want to pitch the land division project or the residential infill project. Both of those were neither silver bullets to solve our housing crisis. They're all part of a multifaceted number of different strategies that are required increase and diversify the types of housing that are available. So I think that might have hit your first question. Is that right? The second question about space for trees. So preserving existing trees and preserving space for future trees. Yeah, it's a bit of a different question from the way our regulations apply. So when we're looking at a land division and we're looking at the site design and where lots are located and where streets will go, we're looking to optimize retention of existing trees. And it's the development standards that apply to those lots that look at the tree planting requirements. So even with the tree preservation, there's still the tree density requirements that get applied to ensure each of those lots has a minimum amount of trees planted. And those development standards also include things like building coverage limitations. And I think what you're highlighting is a potential shortfall or shortcoming in the amount of area that is required to be kept open for trees. We have a building coverage requirement. Typical lot in the single dwelling zone is 45% as the maximum building coverage. That did not change as part of the residential infill project. And actually the FAR limits that we applied kind of helps a little bit reduce the footprint of that new housing. But when you look at what 45% building coverage really equates to on a 5,000 square foot lot, there's not a lot of like squares open. It's more linear setbacks around the side, a little bit in the front and a little bit in the back. We have for years discussed the notion of impervious area limits to address sort of the other parts of development, which are not buildings. We don't have those. It's not a simple challenge to tackle that. There's a lot of analysis required. We would have, I mean, it would essentially be a further limitation on all property owners about how much patio or deck or whatever structures they have on their site. So not a simple ask, but it's sort of another part of this issue about preserving space for future trees and allowing them to grow with enough soil volume to support them. There are some requirements in Title 11 that get at sort of minimum size squares and space for trees, but it's pretty, I mean, I would call it, you know, kind of the minimum. So one other place to be looking.
Okay, I think we have Commissioner Clapp and then Commissioner Jortner.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Appreciate the what you've offered us today. What I'm curious about, and this is kind of coming from a design or a development inspector. A lot of the regulations that you have up here, they can kind of choose, and I happen to believe, I should say, that developers 90% of the time don't want to choose something that will retain trees. They want to get rid of all of their trees. So I think the question that I want to kind of pose, and I don't know if you can answer it strictly here, is this designed to require that people will retain trees and prioritize those trees, like maybe giving them an incentive rather than saying choose option A or choose option B? And I don't want to really like dial in that say this is their intent, but my experiences showed very much that tree removal is a priority for many developers, or even anyone just putting a building on a house. They want to remove the trees, make the whole place look brand new, and then build their buildings. So I guess what I want to know is if this is really actually going to move the needle on tree preservation or just make it quicker for the status quo in terms of getting new houses on.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I will say when we looked at, so in response to the feedback we got about splitting up the criteria and the standards, you know, the benefit of criteria is you can get at that prioritization question. Prioritize this, you know, working around this tree because it's the best tree on the site, or these are the best trees on the site. Work around those. We care a little less about these others that are not doing so well. The standards are inches and diameter, right? So that quality question sort of goes out the window. So in response to the feedback, like boost the preservation standard. So we at least capture more trees in the hopes that we get better quality trees. We've got sort of marching orders to look at streamlining and not further complicating residential development. So we wanted to see what the net effect of that increase would be on land divisions. So we went back and looked at prior cases from the last 5 years, and I kind of had the same impression that you did, that developers would kind of hit the bare minimum of preservation and maintain the most flexibility they had for the site. What we found was that out of like 180, there was 30 cases where they didn't meet the standards as they were. So they already required mitigation. And then there were 180 cases that met the standards. And when we applied the higher standards, there were only 10 cases that dropped below meeting those new higher standards. And showing us that developers in 170 of those cases were already preserving above and beyond what they were required to preserve, which was frankly surprising. But the sort of result of that is, yeah, there's some additional cases where the higher standards are going to capture more trees or require higher levels of mitigation, but it's not a significant, when judged against what people are already doing, it's not a significant impact on the residential development. But you're sort of highlighting this tension between how standards function and how criteria work. And we did explore a number of different alternatives to try to prioritize things: bigger trees, native trees, tree groves. And as, I mean, if you've worked in development sort of situations or site planning kind of schemes, it's very variable. It's very site dependent what the priority should be on each site, depending on what's there. So each time we came up with this different alternative, we would immediately run into, well, it doesn't make sense here, it doesn't make sense here, it doesn't make sense here. This priority doesn't work. And it also added numbers of layers of complicating regulations that just made it very confusing. So we eventually came back to the pre-existing standards and then just bumped them up. I will say we added, so if you probably didn't spot it in those proposed standards, there's already an option for when tree groves are present on a site that has only been used once. It can be a little bit inhibiting for development to try to preserve an entire grove intact. So, the requirements, you got to preserve the whole thing. You don't want to preserve half a grove. That can be, as the forestry staff have pointed out, that can be a little bit not good. So when you're preserving the entire grove, we kept that diameter inch threshold the same as a way to sort of encourage people to use that. We boosted everything else up, but the tree grove stayed the same. So hopefully giving a little more of a tangible incentive for people to try to do that when it makes sense.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Morgan. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, we only have 3 minutes left, but and I know we all have questions and thoughts about this. Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I just wanted to say, I think that, the land division code currently is the strongest tree preservation requirements in the city. And this proposal is going to change things significantly. I appreciate the work the staff has done to kind of consider all these issues. I think we'll want to, when the proposed draft comes out, I'm hoping that we can sort of revisit some of these issues and weigh in as part of the hearing record, and so we can talk about how to do that. Morgan, it raised a really interesting point, and this issue of impervious area standards. A lot of cities have them, and we don't. We look at building coverage, but we don't look at overall impervious area standards. And I think that as part of the urban forest management plan or other land use related stuff, we might want to think about that a little bit more. Finally, while I understand it's the difficulty of infusing the qualitative criteria from the discretionary standards like tree health or species and so forth, the good trees into the standards, I think it might be worth having some more discussion about how to how to do that rather than a simple numeric approach. But I understand it's a slippery slope, so that'll be fun to return to.
And I'm all ears. This was one. There were a few items that we really were challenged with trying to convert qualitative criteria into standards, and trees was one of the top ones.
Thank you. Commissioner Clapp?
Yeah, I just real fast wanted to note that I appreciate that this is a process that you guys have a lot of top down from the state saying we need housing, streamline this. I do understand that, but if I was to propose what would help would be having a city arborist or even a third party arborist that comes out and assesses the trees and says what are the good trees to keep and how can we adjust the development around this to retain these trees and retain this space, rather than having the arborist be hired by the developer to come and say, yeah, all these trees are this way, or no, these are the best trees that happen to work well with their development. So having the city come out and basically have the flexibility to move things around and have a third party, not the city, not the arborist, or not the developer's arborist, take a look. So maybe that's something that can be done in the future when there's less pressure just to kind of get the houses done. So that would help bring in a little bit more of that qualitative aspect to it, I think. But that's, again, just my opinion. So thanks for sharing, Morgan.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Appreciate that, Commissioner Clapp. Yeah, following up on some of your thoughts. Really appreciate the presentation and really see the kind of the deep expertise and history that needs to be understood to figure these issues out. And my question to both you and Mr. Lando and other experts who followed this over time is, how can the commission best support changes going forward that don't continue to promote the disparity that we have in our canopy, right? To me, it's hard for me to believe if you're talking about infill build in the city, out in the exterior may be different, that you're not creating more affordable housing, right? I'm sure there's a history on this and actually real data that would be great to see. So if we are not preserving enough green space or opportunity for tree canopy in these infill lots, we're continuing to see the pattern that we have of discrimination, where lower income folks do not have the positive health benefits of green space and canopy, and then we all don't have that positive benefit for climate change going forward. So just would love to hear, and obviously we don't have the time now and you're on a short timeline to present this to city council, etc., but what can we do, what can we support you with going forward to try to help with that as we have to balance the canopy with affordable housing and more housing? So
Yeah, and I think I would just say pretty quickly is that the balance is the goal, right? And we hear the conversation happening elsewhere, and most likely the development community. It's this either or thing. They're pitted against each other, and I don't believe that. I don't think that those two things are mutually exclusive. They can occur together. More intention around how that happens is required to do that, but that also means more complication, at least in terms of regulation. And right now, the appetite for that is a little lacking. But it's this commission's role to sort of help bolster the other part of this conversation. It's that's part of that balance, right? So, what I would suggest is we have this hearing at the Planning Commission coming up next month, so that might be a little quick, but we have some time before we get to City Council. If you can't make that Planning Commission testimony deadline, if there are tangible, concrete recommendations that you think can be incorporated, like I said, I'm all ears. We've tried a number of different things, trying to balance also complexity and simplicity, and our sort of objective of streamlining. But with that in mind, if there are other ideas out there, bring them. Ryan?
Yeah, Morgan, can you remind me when is the public hearing of the Planning Commission?
Yeah, March 26th at 5 p.m. And
Okay.
you can submit through the map app too up to the hearing time.
Okay, so that's after the UFC's next meeting. If the UFC wanted to very quickly, because we have other folks here to move on the next agenda item, to maybe ask the policy committee to put together some thoughts that could be presented on behalf of the UFC.
Nice, that's great. Okay, I think we're at a time. Commissioner McMillan, was your question answered?
Thanks, Morgan.
No, I think that if we're writing a letter with the policy group, that I can just follow up with that.
Cool, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Tracy. That was excellent. Okay, we're moving on to the single permitting authority transition update.
Brian,
Sorry, I was muted. I was just saying that Terry is here to present this, and that you should be able to share your screen if you have a PowerPoint presentation.
excellent. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for that. And thank you, Urban Forestry Commission and Brian, for inviting me to talk with you all today. My name is Terry Tyson, and I'm the strategy manager for the Permit Improvement Team. And one of the projects that this team has been charged with project managing is something that we're calling the Single Permitting Authority project. I've also invited David Kuhnhausen, who's the interim director of the Bureau of Development Services, and Kurt Kruger, who is the executive manager of Planning and Development Services for our public infrastructure bureaus, to join me today. I'm going to be going through some slides, and I'm going to move through them quickly so we can open it up for your questions, and David and Kurt will be here to help fill those questions. So now I will attempt to share my screen with you all. And I am working from a laptop, so if I do not see hands raised as we get further along, I'm hoping that, Brian, you can help with that part. Okay, can everybody see this? Slides? Okay, terrific. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of background. I don't know how much you all know or have been following this work of the Single Permitting Authority, but this work, I think that the council, it's grounded in the Permit Improvement Task Force work, and Jan Cairo, Director Long, and also Casey Jergerst have been involved in that work and been along on this journey with us. We started the task force work, I guess about 3 years ago. And one of the first things that happened with that group was that they came together around some guiding principles because it was, of course, 8 different bureaus coming together to solve some issues around our permitting structure and an audit in response to an audit in March 2021 that called out some pretty serious concerns around how that was all working or not working. And because these bureaus all have different regulatory responsibility, different missions, it was important to have at least some kind of shared values or understanding. And so the slide you see here are the guiding principles that group came up with. Decisions can be made quickly. Every bureau can meet its performance goals and objectives. Customers report high satisfaction. Employees are supported and successful in their jobs. Process is transparent and consistent, and city infrastructure reflects city priorities. And I want to pause there to say that city infrastructure includes trees. We think of trees as part of the city infrastructure. Jen and Casey have been very good, big advocates for that and have had strong voices in that part of this conversation. So what happened after this task force work and recommendations and all of that, the Permit Improvement Team, which I'm a part of and lead, began working on recommendations that came out of the task force. Fast forward to August 30th, Commissioner Rubio and the other commissioners and the mayor unanimously voted to accelerate where they thought this work should head, and that was bringing everybody under a single point of authority, a single decision maker around development in the city. And so my team quickly was assigned to the job. We quickly wanted to figure out how we could best, in this very short time frame, and I'll walk you through the time frame of the resolution, how we could best organize so that there was a lot of employee voice and employee engagement in how this was going to happen and be put into, into motion. You'll see this chart here. Chief Administrative Officer, our team operates out of the City Office of Management and Finance. Chief Administrative Officer Michael Jordan was put in charge of being the leader and the champion and the director of and the decision maker ultimately of how this all was going to come together. A project team was assigned. Again, that's the permanent improvement team. And then you'll see the work groups that are aligned there in the different colored boxes. Many of these work groups were already in motion. And I will say forestry employees are represented on most, if not all, of these work groups. And if they're not represented, it's usually because of capacity issues. And so we try our best to provide briefings and communication. But all of these work groups, if they were not in motion, were put into motion. For example, a communication work group had to come into play because change management and communication became extremely critical with a very significant change, like bringing everybody together into a new organizational structure. But groups like the regulatory work group, Brian sits on that body, had already been in motion and working on some really exciting things in terms of collaboration. And so scope of work for this project then was added to their already the things they were already doing. So this just is an example of how we really wanted to mobilize and engage staff in how this all came together, because it impacts them obviously so intimately, and they are the subject matter experts and they really know best about how workflows and processes can be improved. So we wanted to take their lead. The timeline for this resolution is very, very brisk. You'll see it here. I'm not going to walk through it, but ultimately the idea and the goal expressed by council is that this first iteration of a new organizational structure, if you will, a new entity, be in place by July 1st of 2024. So the resolution lined out many different directives and objectives and aspirations and goals. These are just a few of those, and I wanted to highlight them because we keep going back to them in terms of what it is we're hoping to achieve with all of this effort to create a new way of working together that is ultimately designed to, of course, support customers, but also better to support staff. There's a lot of frustration with handoffs and miscommunication and processes and some, when we look at the customer surveys that we've done and the staff surveys that we've done, there's a lot of alignment around where the frustration is and where the pinch points are. And that's actually really good news. So a preliminary organizational chart was one of the first major milestones of the resolution. And so this is the process by which we undertook and to get us to that point. We were asked to, the resolution was passed the 30th. We were asked to deliver a preliminary org chart by December 29th. What did we do? We consulted research and process improvement data from the Bureau's employees and community members, convened advisory and subject matter expert work groups. We did an all-day work session with about 40 staff to look at a team-based functional org chart, a couple of drafts, and to make some recommendations on how it could be changed or improved. That group did a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of really hard thinking. And then we've been consulting with the labor unions, HR, and Bureau leadership around this org chart. We also met with every review team and did a discovery session and learned from them how their team operates, how much time they're spending on development services. We know that forestry, for example, and water are organized much differently than the other review teams. And so doing a deep dive in how that works and the impacts on their team was really important. So that brings us to the org chart itself. I'll say that this org chart is preliminary. It's a first iteration. It's a beginning. We are moving quickly to meet the directive of the council. I think Director Jordan would say if he were here that in a perfect world, we would probably do a big comprehensive business process analysis from end to end before we started moving people around. We're not able to do that with this time frame, so we're doing a first iteration of an org chart. And then the council in the resolution does say, come back to us And we encourage and we want to see a business process analysis happen before any further changes are made, so that we can ensure that they're the right changes and that we can really understand our business operations more completely. I think just pausing here really quick, and then I'm going to pass it. I'm going to do one more slide and then open it up to questions. Where you see asterisks are where they're the most significant changes from how we operate today. The gray boxes that you see along the top represent kind of a customer journey actually in our process. And so where we're focusing and where the major changes are happening are in customer support and permitting services. We know that preparing customers and making sure they have the information they need, that they're educated, that they can find things easily, that it's accessible and equitable for all customers is a priority, both for customers and for staff. And it also is matches the core values of the city. So there's some pretty significant changes that are tied to that division. Then you'll move to the public infrastructure review teams in that division. We had already started moving in the direction of bringing those teams together as more of a cohesive unit. That was a recommendation of the task force, and Kurt Kruger has been leading that effort. It's a continuation of what had already been in motion. And then the other asterisks are digital business services and administration and business operations. There have been some changes there to put an emphasis on what has been a very frustrating division, I think, and interaction for both staff and customers around technology. We went online very quickly, the city of Portland, during COVID. It was supposed to be a 3-year process, and it happened in 3 months. So we need to do some re-engineering and some serious changes to how that service is delivered. And then last but not least, administration and business operations. We just did some sort of intuitive, logical grouping of internal services in this particular division. So nothing really seismic, just kind of logical. And last but not least, the other thing the council did was to ask the project team to call out where the gaps and challenges continue to be, and to ask for additional support if needed in these areas. And so this is just a summary of, again, areas where there's consensus from customers and staff around areas of need, areas of continued focus and attention. In many of these areas, things are underway. The thing I would call your attention to that is probably most pronounced right now is our funding model. As you know, or you may not know, BDS, the Bureau of Development Services, it's completely fee-based. And so that leaves them really vulnerable to economic upturns and downturns. They're having to lay off staff right now because we're in an economic downturn. Those peaks and valleys are not healthy. It makes it difficult to retain skilled staff. It makes it difficult to meet customer demand when things recover. And it also is an environment that will be challenging for the transition of new staff to come in. Funding is following the staff from the bureaus that are partnering or coming in as partner bureaus for this first year, but we need a plan for year 2, 3, 4 that's actually sustainable, that gives staff confidence, that helps us retain and sustain both customer service, but also our regulatory integrity. And so that's a really big issue. I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions for myself and my colleagues, David and Kurt.
Okay, can everyone mute themselves? Yeah, somebody's not muted. Okay, yeah, David?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like Terry said, my name is David Quinoz and I'm the interim director at BDS. And I just want to clarify one thing that Terry said. I think her presentation was very concise, but just to follow up, because I know there's a lot of sensitivity around this. She mentioned that we're going through layoffs right now. Just to clarify, we've already been through layoffs. We laid off people at the beginning of January of this year. We're not proposing any additional layoffs at this time. So I just want to make that perfectly clear, because unfortunately, and no, we're all very sensitive to that right now, and there's a lot of concern out there. So I just want to call that out before anyone, before that becomes a topic of conversation in my bureau as well.
Thank you, David.
Other commissioners, thoughts, questions? Okay, I actually had one. So usually, I mean, this is a obviously very complicated project, and my personal background kind of in quality improvement in medicine, tells me that usually kind of form follows function. In this case, city council sort of said reorganized to have a single authority without perhaps understanding exactly what all the problems were and how they could best be solved. And we're a community board, right? So my interest is really a synthesis of what are we trying to solve for the community in terms of quality around permitting, and that being front and center. And then the second thing is, what have the employees faced, or the workers who have to work in this area? What are their insights to what the problems are? And, are they being put front and center to make sure that we are actually reorganizing to have outcomes of solving the history of problems and getting to a better overall outcome. So just very interested in your expert thoughts on this. And again, if there's anything that we could do as a community board to sort of support the best outcome.
I'll take a first swing at that. So there have been multiple audits, multiple studies over decades on this topic. And most recently, I mentioned the task force. We've done a lot of surveying of staff, of customers. So we have a very robust understanding, and our staff has provided really excellent feedback over and over about where the big issues are. So I don't think we have a lot of confusion about the big issues, right? And I appreciate your background. Thank you for sharing that. I think that when I say that it's a little bit backwards, it's more about the actual workflow and business operation that we don't have a real handle on, because we haven't been working as one cohesive service, right? We've been working as 6 or 7 different separate services. So in terms of what is the problem we're solving for, is that a customer, in a nutshell, there's and David and Kurt and others can chime in, is that the customer thinks of us as a city, right? And we are presenting as 7 separate bureaus. Understandably, there's different, like I said, regulatory responsibilities, but we need to change how we interface with the customers so that it is not them having the burden of going to 7 different bureaus, and that they are interfacing with the city to get the permit they need. And in terms of how this body can help, again, I'm so happy that you engaged and you reached out to us. What you see and what you experience, I mean, I think the vast majority of folks have applied for a building permit at one period or another, many have. And those individual experiences actually are some of the greatest information that we can garner in terms of how to improve.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson?
My question revolves around enforcement. Is SLO going to be engaged in enforcement for permits that they issue, or is that going to go back to the bureaus? How is that done? History in urban forestry is they've not had adequate staff or funds to do the job of enforcement that they would like. And I'm wondering, when this comes under a single permitting authority, is that likely to change? Thank you.
Jerry, I might try to take this one, and see what I can do. Again, Kurt Kruger, Executive Manager for Planning and Development. I'm representing all 4 infrastructure bureaus, which includes forestry in this space. We couldn't get everything done with this reorganization on day one. And as Terry alluded to, we have plans. Director Jordan has said to City Council and others, we have to do a business process analysis to look at the whole beginning to end of this process. Inspection and enforcement is one of those elements that we couldn't do on day one, but it's an important piece for each of the bureaus to make sure we are tackling at a later date. So it has been parking lot, I hate to use that term, but parking lotted to be addressed when we come back and do that future analysis work. But it is not included on phase 1 of this work. And so it's going to be a tension that we're going to have to work through for the next 6 to 12 months or so.
So if I could follow up, does that mean that it's a rush to allow the developers to get their quick permits, but it's a slowdown to figure out how we might actually enforce the permits that the developers are getting quickly?
I'm not sure I would say it's a rush to get developers to permit. I think we're moving quickly as the city is reorging itself to get this work and these staff located in one location to coordinate better. So we're speaking, as Terry said, as one voice to our community, and giving staff the ability to get, singular answers. That doesn't mean that it should change the quality of the work that's being done or the outcome of the permit review process. But we also need to work on the inspection piece. There are handoffs between the permit and inspection in each of the bureaus that we have to focus on. So we are making sure that what we put on paper and issue a permit for results in what we're looking for at the end.
I might just jump in here too, and perhaps Casey has perspective on this as well. But we did have conversations about including compliance in this initial reorg, and I think that the subject matter experts, again, Casey and Jen, expressed that wasn't the right move for forestry right now to include that part in this initial change.
Thank you. Commissioner Clapp?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to know if what the goal, kind of the stated goal for all the folks are that are going to be in the single permitting. So let's say they're all in a room and they're reviewing plans. Is their goal each to do their own project or to increase housing, to move the permit faster? Is there any stated thing like that, or is it more something where everybody is represented from the city who is saying, the city has all of these priorities and these objectives. These are what we're trying to accomplish and steer the development through that? Or is it just now we're all here, so we're going to avoid conflicts down the line, but nothing is actually going to, everyone's still doing their own thing. Does any of this kind of make sense?
Casey, I think Terry can share the stated goals that we have set forth from the beginning. They're high level down to hitting the ground running goals. But for the staff and our customers, played in this space a long time. And we have goals, values that are this group and like groups in PBOT and BES and water and city council have said, these are our values across the city. This is what we want our city to look like as development occurs. And unfortunately, they don't all speak well to each other. They're done in a little bit of isolation and they bump into each other at times. And so our staff are often in really awkward positions of having to advocate for their piece of the code and their rule with their colleagues in the room that are also doing their job. And it's an uncomfortable space to be. And for our customers, they get stuck at the end. Their project is on hold while some of those resolutions are sought. And so this attempts to try to provide maybe a pyramid on up to get a decision made so it unsticks messy subjects. It's tough. And a lot of this occurs within the right of way. And we have a lot of things that we want to do in our public right of way, and street trees are a big element of that. And sometimes they bump into hydrants or signals or streetlights or you name it. And so this tries to give us a place where we can resolve those conflicts in a much faster environment to move projects along and help take some of that pressure off the staff.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Kurt. Thank you. So I guess I want to make sure that as that is going through, that as the trees bump up against the hydrants and the street lights and the signals, that sometimes the street lights and the signals are the thing that are moved, and that bump does not say, great, well, we need this and we're more important, so the trees can go away. I think that's ultimately what I want to see, is that while those get done, while this single permitting project is happening, that the priorities do not stay the same as they at least were when I was working with development with you and all of your crew. Yeah, that's mainly the thing that I want to see, is that this will also open up some amount of creativity to allow the city to make more creative decisions that ultimately accomplish all the goals, rather than just the engineer saying, sorry, this is exactly how it needs to be and I will not budge.
I just want to share some highlights for the last year. I've been in this role a little over a year, and I've been advocating that we push decisions down to the lowest level possible at the staff level, where the staff are interacting. We have had tremendous outcomes over the last year. I can't think of one project that's been delayed by more than a day or two when we've taken this approach of asking the staff to get together and collaborate. I think the more we can get people in the office and physically sit down and work together, we're going to see more and more improvement on that. But we are seeing collaboration, and as if staff bring their review role to the table with the what's in the best interest of the city as a whole, we are starting to see tremendous cultural change and outcomes that really reflect that approach. And I think our customers really appreciate that. So yes, certain things will win on certain days, but it's a very case by case basis. And I wouldn't say we don't have clear direction. This wins all the time. It's going to be what is important. This may be a really significant tree in this case, and let's look at some moves of other things, or vice versa. And so we're already seeing the benefits of that work happening today.
Appreciate it, Kurt. Thank you.
If I might add to Casey, to address your question, going forward, something that is really exciting, and I think I mentioned that Brian is serving on this group. There's a regulatory work group, and that was a group that was pulled together as a result of the task force as well. And their charge is to bring together the policy folks from across the city into one group, and they've created a new process rather, on how policy is developed, it is implemented, and then a feedback loop to ensure that it actually had the intended outcome, right? And this is something that they've already piloted and are trying, and I'm really hopeful that that will actually help what we're talking about right now, just at the other end of how code is created and implemented, and brought forward to both the public and council as well. So
Thank you very much, Taylor.
Just want to make a very quick comment. We're out of time. Thanks, Mr. Kruger, for saying, that you really want the frontline employees to, come up with this creative solutions. And just to comment, there's work being done on the higher level goals for natural resources. And of course, we have higher level goals for housing, and to just make sure that those higher level goals are front and center to the people who are really doing the work, because they will creatively say, okay, here's what we could do with permitting to preserve natural resources to get our higher level city goals met. And so anyway, and if there's anything we could help with in that regard, I'm sure we'd love to do it. And thanks for giving us all this great info. It's a tough project, and best of luck with it. Okay, let's see.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
We're moving on to the policy committee statement on PSEF and select advisory representative.
Okay, I think I'll start on this, and then others can chime in. At the January meeting, the UFC heard from staff about Commissioner Rubio's proposal to allocate some $540 million of unanticipated PSEF revenue across City Bureau programs relating to climate change, environmental justice, and community involvement. And so the UFC moved to have the policy committee develop a draft letter in support of the programs we heard about, which included the funding for street tree maintenance and the arborist trainee program forwarded by Portland Parks and Rec. And we met after that. Bruce Nelson also attended a PCF committee meeting and forwarded those general perspectives as well after the last January meeting. The letter that Brian Lando sent to you reflects, in addition to those points, review of presentations and materials that went to the PCF committee during their three-hour meetings to discuss these overall allocation proposals. It reflects the PCF committee's ultimate decision to recommend approval of most of the proposals to the city council. It reflects additional discussions with city staff at Portland Parks and Rec and BES. And there were several drafts that were reviewed by policy committee members and iterations that resulted in the one before you today. The letter does continue to support the street tree maintenance funding and arborist trainee program. We put together a number of recommendations around the street tree maintenance program with a focus on accountability, equity-based workforce development, community participation, and a long-term dedicated funding source for street tree program, not necessarily PCF, but it could be PCF or it could be other sources, but that it really needs to be funding in perpetuity ultimately. As you probably noticed, the letter goes beyond those two programs and includes several more that the committee felt were important that would support carbon sequestration and or emissions reductions while also contributing to the health and resilience of the urban forest and the community. Those include funding to replace some hundreds of gas-powered leaf blowers with battery-powered leaf blowers, and several BES proposed programs. One is the yard tree or private property tree planting program that exists today. Another is a watershed and natural systems related bundle of programs that includes O&M for some 900 acres of city-owned natural areas. It also includes the early detection and rapid response portion of our invasive species program, which is really important for keeping the really bad actors of invasive species to take off in our, on our landscape, both in our natural areas and throughout the urban landscape. And the third bundle focus on constructed stormwater facilities, which are really green infrastructure that's woven through the densest fabric of our city with its primary focus of infiltrating stormwater and removing or managing impervious area, but really are largely green spaces that are on properties or larger stormwater facilities, some of which function as natural areas, but they're like Mason Flats Wetland Enhancement Project in the Columbia Slough that you wouldn't know as a constructed facility, but it is. And it also, with that bundle, also would fund the city's private property stormwater retrofit program, which is where environmental services goes out and provides technical and financial assistance to property owners to manage impervious area on their property. And those often result in either removing pavement and putting in trees and other vegetation or otherwise managing that stormwater. And, these go beyond trees. And I just wanted it's a great opportunity to remind ourselves that the urban forest management plan actually defines the urban forest as a, quote, complex system of trees and smaller plants, wildlife, associated organisms, soil, water, air, and people in and around the city. So these proposed allocations, we feel, go beyond trees, but certainly are in direct support of the urban forest in terms of trees, other vegetation, and the hydrology, frankly, that helps trees grow and survive in often inhospitable urban conditions. And Chenua from BES is here, I believe, to answer any questions about those programs that we hadn't heard about before. And so open it up for questions. Or before I do that, Megan or Bruce, do you have any other points you'd like to make about the letter?
I wanted to point out to the City Council gave a very expedited timeline for all of these things. And so the supporting documentation from the city bureaus in their request for the use of these funds, they weren't requiring a whole lot. And part of that, they're saying we're in a rush. So there aren't necessarily extensive details available I suspect Megan had to do more paperwork for any PSEF grant that Friends of Trees did than what Urban Forestry had to do for this particular round. So that's not a criticism of the bureaus. That's the reality that the city council gave to them. Give us your projects quickly. So it's personally frustrating to me, but that's just the rules of the game for this round. So.
You know, I neglected to mention one thing, one important thing is that my understanding is that the environmental services related proposals would basically for continuation. It's not for an expanded level of service, that these programs would be cut because of a large hole in the budget and constraints on rate increases that were requested that the council is not, doesn't have the appetite to approve those right now. So these programs could go away if they're not funded in this go round.
So just want to quickly clarify, because we only have, 10 minutes or so. The outcome that we want here is for folks to make sure they've looked at the letter that we want, supported. So if you haven't, just quickly take a look at it and correct me if I'm wrong, Co-Chair Jortner. Originally, we hadn't discussed sort of the BES proposals much here. So if you have any questions about that aspect, now's the time to sort of get clarification of it. So I guess, we're going to want to vote, right, on submitting this letter. And so let's preserve maybe the last 2 minutes, 3 minutes to make sure we do that. Commissioner Vandermark?
I don't want to co-opt any questions people have. The one really quick thing I always like to reiterate with this is the original intent of PSEF versus this, right? Originally, PSEF was a community-driven effort to drive money to community organizations led by, coalitions of colored community groups, right? So that is the foundation of PSEF. It is bringing in significantly more money than expected. And there's been a lot of kind of large business, I would say opposition, right? They don't want to have to pay taxes on this, right? So it's also identifying ways to kind of move money. So just kind of giving that framing. And this is kind of right now this seemingly one-time allocation through these various ways. One thing I would love, just because you are here, Chenoa, just any brief high-level highlight about these three to the point that we haven't had conversation. I think Roberta obviously has done a nice job, but any additional context you could add, I think would be helpful on those as we've talked more about, street tree maintenance.
Perfect, thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to answer questions. My name is Chenoa Philibom. I am with the Bureau of Environmental Services, and I lead a team called Community Partnerships that has 2 green infrastructure delivery teams within it. So I think Roberta did an amazing job summarizing the breadth of the programs that are currently under our asks of PSEF funding. So I don't know that I have a lot to add to that. It's supportive of the forestry. It's really native plantings, green infrastructure, built and natural, working together. So I think it is something that does support, canopy as a whole and supports the kind of native or natural infrastructure within the city of Portland. If you have specific questions about any of it, feel free to ask. And I do want to just thank you all. I don't know, I drop in any chance I get to listen to the UFC meetings. I think your perspective, your questions are incredible. I learned so much from you. So I appreciate any advice, any questions, any feedback you have.
Any questions, commissioners? One that I had was, to what extent were your asks to PSEF new work, versus existing work? And I know that PSEF was prioritizing shovel-ready types of projects and so forth. Can you just clarify some of that?
Yeah, I believe Roberta talked about this as well, and then it's in the our director Don Uchiyama talked about this before council, but all of the asks for PSEF are for programs that were going to be significantly reduced or eliminated due to budget cuts. And so none of this is new work. This is funding existing work.
Any other questions or thoughts? Ms. Long, Director Long? Is that a hand?
It's also me struggling with my boring buttons. Sorry about that. Thank you. I just I'd like to just I'm sorry, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adina Long. I'm the Director of Portland Parks and Recreation. Sorry about that. I just want to remind the commission of two things as they contemplate this letter. One is that while the proposals have been approved by the PSEF committee, the budget packages, which only include the first year of the 5 years of funding, will still need to be approved by the city council through the budget process, which obviously you know that. But also, I want to remind the commission that council approved a resolution that called for citywide operational natural areas and tree management to transition to the vibrant community service area together with Parks and Recreation. So as you know, we've been working with BDS towards what that the implementation of that resolution looks like. And as such, I would just recommend that given those potential future alignments, the commission consider supporting the PSEF funding allocation specific to the functional areas and programs as opposed to by specific bureau, or at least to recognize that the city is undergoing the development and implementation of this natural resource service delivery work plan, and that the structure of how these services, all of them, are delivered in the future may impact the funding or the funding stream. So love the support. I think all of the programs are valuable and important to the city. I just wanted to point those two things out, and it might strengthen the letter for the council. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Vandermark?
Adina, can I just ask a clarifying question? Because I want to make certain I understood what you just said. Are you kind of advocating that like we not maybe within the letter, like break it up by bureau within like how it is, to just say we broadly support this type of funding moving forward, recognizing it could shift? Is that kind of, I just want to make certain I understand.
Well, one or the other. I mean, I think that you could keep it as is, but also recognize that there were resolutions in the last year that were passed and that we're doing this natural resource service delivery work, and that that the work that PSEF is funding, or that these investments are important, but that you recognize that there's this other conversation going on, and who provides this services might shift in the future, or maybe take the bureaus out but leave the program areas in. I mean, that's really up to you. I'm just concerned that that by identifying very specifically your support, that it could sort of not so much weaken it, but it would be strengthened by acknowledging that this other process is going on.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Commissioner Jortner?
Yeah, thanks, Director Long. Director Long, I think it's defined too in the intro, add a sentence recognizing that this natural resource service delivery discussion is going on, and that, you know, roles and responsibilities may shift, something along those lines. But just note that these reflect the material submitted to date, you know, from the participating bureaus. How's that sound to folks? Thanks for raising that.
Excellent. So do we have, it sounds like there's a suggestion to slightly modify the letter as Co-Chair Joytner suggested, and we were advised by Director Long. Does that sound good to everyone on the Zoom? Any other thoughts or concerns on that? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the letter with, the slight revision?
This is Darilee. I motion to approve.
Any second?
I can second.
Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. Okay, we'll slightly revise the letter and submit it on behalf of everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Clearly, yes, Mr. Lando.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Oh.
off. I just
Oh,
wanted
no,
to.
that's okay.
I just want to know that in our last minute, it would be great to discuss the equitable tree canopies advisory committee,
Right.
since
Thank you.
we'd love to have a member of the Urban Forestry Commission serve on that, and they are hoping to convene next month, probably before the next UFC meeting. So our last 90 seconds or so, just wanted to flag that.
Okay, Commissioner Meissner.
I just wanted to say, since for what we'll be voting on is for something that's supposed to be focused on equity, that I think it's important that we recognize that over the last year, our commission has had a lot of issues with equity. I think that's just important that we're mindful of that as we decide who represents and as a group going forward, especially when we talk about the equity work group we'll be voting on. So I just wanted to bring that before we vote.
Okay, any volunteers for being on the committee? Maybe again, what we could do is follow up, with an email, giving a little bit more detail about it and time commitment and that type of thing. Let's see, what did Megan say here? Okay, all right, great. Next policy committee meeting, February 19th. Love to have fellow commissioners attend. Thank you. Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that the staff sent us a link last time to the PSEF Equitable Canopy Work Group kind of criteria and composition stuff. And I don't know if folks had a chance to look at it. I did, and I was just, I read, I would like to nominate somebody if we have time to do that. Based on what I understand the committee's role is, and it will focus a lot on the street tree maintenance component, at least initially. So I think in terms of experience and skill and working with people and so forth, I was going to nominate Commissioner Clapp as a possible candidate for that role.
Yeah, thank you. I also was just raising my hand to volunteer for that. So
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
No, I took it down afterward. So yeah, I'd be happy to join that.
I have to go. I have another meeting I have to join, but I volunteer as well.
Oh, great. Awesome. Can we have two? I mean, that's another nice option.
I can talk to the PSEF folks. The plan was for one,
Okay.
but it's
Yeah,
great to have
yeah.
two people. I know we've done that sort of like a primary and a backup for the urban forest plan,
right.
CAC. So maybe we can work something out there. That's great.
Yeah, I'd love that. I think you two would really balance each other really well, kind of the tree expertise and the equity interest, etc. So that would be a cool way for us to go. Also want to suggest, Commissioner Meissner, I'd love to have in the future, a discussion of, how we could make sure that our commission work is equitable. It's something we could have on the agenda. Maybe I can follow up with you on, how we might best do that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry, I really have to go though, so I will
Okay,
see you
sounds
guys
good.
next month.
Take care now.
Thanks, bye.
All right, I think we've come to the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
And we do have a appeals committee right after this, and we're already kind of 3 minutes into that. So if anyone needs to take a very quick break, a couple minutes and get back on.
Yeah, let's give it I want to give the commissioners, we've been
Yeah.
here almost 3 hours, so I want to give the commissioners, maybe let's give it 5 minutes, reconvene at 11:38.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right,
See y'all
appeals
soon.
committee, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for your great work today.